the message that I get from this, like the teaching that I'm getting from this, is that there's no refuge. There's no refuge from doing this work of addressing harm and patriarchy and power. I've walked away from everything that I've disagreed with my whole life. And it's like the world found the one thing that I can't walk away from. You know, it just means too much to me.
Hello, hello, my sweet friends. Welcome back to Unbroken Chain, episode 53. This is my dear friend Chase Bauer, and this is a really vulnerable conversation. Chase is he's the real deal. Like my favorite people, he is willing to share his process and to be really honest about the fact that he's still in it and still making meaning, and sharing some of the tools that have helped him along the way. So, as you'll hear, Chase is currently working, and has for several years, at Sky Lake, which is a Shambhala meditation retreat in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley. And Shambhala has been in the news. We touched on this in the conversation with Shantae Paradigm Smalls a few episodes ago. Chase, I think, gives a really good condensed overview about it, but if you want to learn more about some of the context, specifically with the Sakyong, this spiritual leader in the Shambhala tradition, definitely take a pause here and go read about it. You don't need a deep dive on it to understand what we're talking about. And really, I think the bigger picture is that culturally, we are confronting harm in every single space of our society right now. And having sort of a gaslighter in chief right now, I think, has propelled a lot of that into our consciousness and into our conversations. And spiritual communities are not immune from that. And in fact, I think some people might even argue that they can be sort of a hotbed for that, because a lot of spiritual bypassing can be used by manipulators to disguise harm. And you know, I spent periods of my life in sort of the wasteland, doing a lot of drinking, a lot of blackout drinking, a lot of trying to annihilate myself in sexual energy. And, you know, the path that I'm on is because that was intolerable, and I couldn't live there. I couldn't live with myself there anymore. It just became untenable. And the person that I am today is through and of that person. And I have a lot of love and affection for that lost girl, because she is me. But I also hurt a lot of people in that process. I wasn't the only one that suffered because of my bad choices and self-loathing. And I think figuring out how to forgive and accept that part of me has been a key to me figuring out how to accept and love other people. Learning how to see people in their full context has really helped me in processing the massive harm and suffering that's happening at scale in the world. And I want to be really clear that that does not mean excusing it. And I've been in close proximity and intimate relationships with people who have used their self-awareness of being harmful people as a way to avoid changing the fact that they're harmful. So this is not about saying, you know, hurt people, and therefore no problem. This is saying everybody needs to get on their own shit. And also, I see who you are in truth, and I love who you are in truth, and then I make my choices about what kind of boundaries I draw so that I can be healthy in order to continue on my own path from there. So it's really complex. And as Chase points out, I don't think there are easy 1, 2, 3, 4 steps on how to do that. It's a willingness to go into that darkness and to bring the laser beam of love and truth and shine it on that, because that's what transforms darkness. That's what transforms stories. And I hope it's only getting brighter and stronger as I continue to take responsibility for my own actions and my own harm making. So I really love Chase. We see each other a couple times a year, and we always drop into really deep and beautiful heart space. And I'm so glad that you get to know him too now. We recorded this outside on the side of a lake where we had just jumped in on one of the last warm days at the end of the summer.
Are you hungry?
What did you have for lunch? What does it smell like?
Chicken.
I'm
Quinoa.
not hungry for chicken.
What was the question? My name is Chase Bauer.
Who are you, Chase Bauer?
Who am I? I'm 31 years old. I live at a Buddhist retreat center in the Hudson Valley of New York. I'm a filmmaker and photographer, and I practice in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, doing Vajrayana Buddhism.
What is Vajrayana Buddhism?
There's 3 broad categories of Buddhism. Hinayana, which is, some people would say, is a derogatory term for a very disciplined, very traditional, kind of what the Buddha taught. It's very popular in Southeast Asia. Theravada Buddhism. There's another word for it that I can't remember that's less derogatory.
What do you mean? How is it derogatory?
Hinayana means narrow vehicle.
Ah, okay.
So people who are on that path are like, my path is narrow. I think they feel kind of insulted by that. And there's nothing wrong with that path. It's the basis of our path as well. It's the starting point. It has to do with discipline and not harming others. And there are precepts that you keep. It's very traditional, kind of focused on not causing harm and like attaining liberation from suffering. And there's Mahayana Buddhism, which expands upon Hinayana and uses that discipline and explores, hey, I can't really become liberated from suffering until everyone becomes liberated from suffering. So it kind of turns the focus outward to it's more compassion-based, more working with others and being of benefit. So everything you do, you dedicate to the well-being of others. That's the idea. And then Vajrayana is actually the same as Mahayana. It's the same view, except you're given extra tools. I've heard a teacher call it technology. You're applying technology to kind of speed up that path. So there's visualization practices and mantra and other tools, ritual tools. We do smoke offerings. There's other things to help kind of apply that view all the time.
In your life?
In your life, yeah.
Do you need a teacher in the path that you're on?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the most important things they say, yeah.
Do you have one teacher?
In my tradition, it's encouraged that once you find a teacher that you kind of stick to what that teacher is. You don't shop around, as they say. You don't pick and choose what different teachers say and apply them to your path. But you at the level of the Vajrayana, if you're working with these much more powerful kind of energetic practices and things, it's helpful to have guidance from somebody who knows what they're doing. And
Okay, so how did you end up in 2019 living at a retreat center? Because we were trying to figure out earlier, it was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
yeah, a while now.
And you were in Chicago making films and working as a bike messenger. And you were somewhat newly sober.
Yeah.
Where did all this start?
I got into Buddhism really young, when I was 16 years old. Sorry, I'm moving away from that.
Okay.
I went to a high school in Durango, Colorado. It was a really tiny boarding school. There's only 30 students total in the school.
Oh, wow.
It's called Colorado Timberline Academy.
Shout out.
One of my favorite places in the world to this day. I could definitely live there again. I would like to go back at some point. And I was like a little hippie. I don't know if I should share that I had dreadlocks. I don't know if you knew that about me.
I don't think so.
It's really bad.
Why? Why do you say that?
I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole, but white kids with dreadlocks from the suburbs of Chicago, just silly. I was just a silly kid.
You were 16.
I loved the Grateful Dead. I loved Fish. I loved jam bands. I was experimenting a lot with drugs and got into various kinds of trouble since I was like 14. And at some point when I was 16 in the dorm there at the high school, I decided to eat an undisclosed amount of LSD out of do you remember those mint drops that were popular?
Oh, like liquid?
Yeah, like liquid mint
Yeah.
drops.
Yeah.
It was like a mint dropper, and there was a visible amount of fluid in the bottom of it, so it's impossible to tell how many hits it was, but later the doctor said it was probably like eight hits. And
Pause for a sec. Had
Okay.
you had experience with acid before at that
I
point?
don't remember if I'd had acid yet. I definitely had mushrooms. I remember on my 16th birthday with my best friend at the time, Daniel Tovo, we ate mushrooms at Six Flags.
How was that?
A terrible experience.
I can't
I
imagine.
do not recommend. Really just waiting in line is the hardest part of that. The roller coasters themselves were pretty fun. But waiting in line with the kinds of people who go to Six Flags in mid-July is really intense.
Those lines already feel never-ending.
Yeah,
And then you're
it's really
inside a
intense.
never-ending
I think-
experience. Yeah.
Sucking on the handlebar, like. So I took this huge amount of LSD, and I didn't do it with anybody.
Did you know that it was
Yes, I knew
a
it
lot?
I don't think I knew what I was getting myself into. I don't think I knew it was that gonna have the effect it did. And I had one friend, Danny, who knew that I was taking it, and he was supposed to be my babysitter, kind of, but we didn't really go through anything about that. I didn't really know. But I ended up like totally going into a different dimension of reality. I was just thinking about this recently that we were talking earlier about emptiness, luminosity, which is this Buddhist concept that if you're practicing Buddhism, you spend the rest of your life kind of contemplating and trying to understand and look at emptiness, luminosity. But it's the kind of dream-like quality of reality, that it's apparent, but it's not as solid as we internalize it to be. And I feel like in that trip, I know that I experienced my world as a dream. So much so that I was trying to convince my roommates that they were just characters in my dream, and that they could do whatever they wanted because it wasn't real. So the way I did that was by doing wild things, like I rolled around in the snow in my boxers and peed on the floor and smoked a cigarette inside and like put it out on something.
Is this from what people told you happened afterwards, or do you remember?
I remember flashes of this.
Wow.
I remember flashes mostly. Like flashes and then blackouts and then flashes and then blackouts. And the flashes I remember were people's faces looking at me, like, and their reactions. And also their faces were completely melting and totally different. And so I was getting hypothermic because I'd rolled around in the snow. I was like naked, I think, and they put me in a couple sleeping bags. And at one point I was going so crazy that they tied me up. My friends tied me up.
Trip sitting at its best.
I remember they had this whole pulley system around the doorway, and they were like, I was like hog-tied on the floor.
Oh my God.
Because I was going absolutely crazy. I had no idea what to do, and they didn't want to call the teachers. And eventually they did. They had to, because I was like banging my head on the wall, turning blue, and like totally blacked out, totally in a different place. And I remember I was like pounding my head on the wall, and I'd black out, and the word life would appear like the word spelled out in front of my eyes would appear, which is kind of tacky, but that's what was happening. And like I was like pounding my head, and I'd black out, and it was like life would appear, and then I'd come to, and then they're like, we're going to get the teacher, man, like we don't know what to do. And I'd black out, and it was like life, and then I'd come to, and like, the teacher's there, and it's Steve Steiner, like one of my favorite teachers, like, hey buddy, like what's going on? And black out, come back, and it's like, he's like, we're gonna call the ambulance. I'm sorry, bud, but we gotta call the ambulance. We don't know what's going on.
Fuck.
I black out, and there's paramedics and a cop searching my pockets, and I black out, and I wake up, and they're like strapping me to a gurney? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I black out and come to, and I'm watching. I remember so vividly through the ambulance doors, all of my poor friends looking at me through. I remember, and they're glowing in the lights, and their faces are just white, and their eyes are just huge, like holy shit. what just happened. And so they took me to the hospital, and there was I think I was strapped down, and there was a cop interviewing me.
You're high as fuck, and there's a cop.
Like, there's literally, the walls are breathing. The computer monitor, I remember one of this big, like, manila colored computer monitors was like breathing inside out. And all the squares in the ceiling, the styrofoam squares, were like switching places and flipping around. And
Were you scared?
I became scared because at one point, first of all, the headmaster of the school totally got me out of trouble with the law. I think he was just like, we're going to take care of this kid. Don't worry about it. Because the cop left. Officer Mike, I remember his name. He had a scar on his head that turned into a question mark when he asked me questions. Apparently, he always asked about me after that. Aww. Whenever he was up at CTA for different kids getting into trouble with various things.
You left an impression.
Yeah. But I had to go to the bathroom at one point and went to the bathroom, and as I was like in the bathroom, I was remembering the doctor asking me why I was hitting my head on the wall. The doctor was like, why were you hitting your face on the wall, Chase? Why were you doing that? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, why would you you broke your jaw. And I looked in the mirror, I was in the bathroom, and my jaw was completely pushed into my face. And I reached up and I could feel it, and all my teeth were broken. And my teeth were like completely like shattered on one side of my face, and my jaw was like 3 inches up into my face. And I could feel it, and I just like broke down crying in the bathroom, realizing that I'd never looked the same. That for the rest of my life I was going to be deformed in my face because of this fucking acid trip. But I don't think I knew I was on acid. That's the other thing. I was tripping so hard I didn't know that I was on acid. None of that was real. There was no bathroom. I never went to the bathroom, apparently.
Whoa.
Yeah. That entire thing's in my head. It's this very vivid memory, though. I think I was strapped down. I don't think I could have gone to the bathroom if I tried. So that's what 8 hits does to a 16-year-old, I think.
How long do you think you were in there?
In the hospital?
Or like in acid world?
36 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember driving back in the center of the bench seat of Dan, the headmaster's truck, with Steve Steiner, the teacher, on the other side of me, and I was in the middle, and it was dawn and the sun was coming up, and I was telling them that we had to time the drive right as the sun was coming up because my eyes were so dilated that they would implode if I saw direct sunlight. Dan does a really good impression of me in that state. He's still a friend. Anyway, so I was in trouble with the school. They grounded me to campus. There was like a 2-strike rule. Your first strike, you get 1 level of punishment, and the second you get, I think, sent home for the rest of the school year or whatever it is. And then if they let you back after that, which isn't guaranteed, like if you go and do your work and like want to come back, the 3rd time you can get expelled. I think that's how it was back then. I don't know what it's like now.
Were most of the students there by choice?
No.
Okay.
No. But so I was grounded to campus, and my teacher, Murray, had a box of books he was getting rid of and left them with me. And there was a bunch of like New Age books in there. And I had all these questions about reality and what my experience was and what was real and what wasn't, spirituality. And I was just totally blasted open. I was very tender, I think, and seeking strongly. And I started reading all these books. I read Living in the Light by Shakti Gawain. I do not recommend. It's like 70s or 80s, super new agey. Like, who knows where this stuff came from.
What do you mean when you use the word new agey? What does that mean to you?
To me, new age is kind of a person combining whatever they feel like is what seems right to them into something and presenting it as an authentic path. So there's nothing, I think, inherently wrong with it. I say it a little bit pretentiously, and I apologize for that.
No.
But I think if I have pretension about it, it's because I come from that. That's where I start, and that's what wasn't working for me at that time. And I think before that trip I'd read like Celestine Prophecy and what was Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which is like sweet book. They're good. They serve a function. But I read that book in Living in the Light, and I was like, well, most of that was not what I'm looking for, but this sounded right. I don't remember what it was, but I found a book on that. I think it was like Compassion or something. And I found a book on compassion. I read that, and like, well, most of that seemed like not for me, but that one thing seemed right. And I found a book on that. And I'd find book after book kind of like that, reading, until I realized that everything I was reading were Buddhist. Like it was almost like I didn't even choose it. And I was really resistant to it for a long time. For years, I was really resistant to religion, quote unquote.
Were you raised in a tradition?
Not really. But I do remember my friend Danny, actually the same one who's trip sitting me, at one point he was like, hey man, so are you like a Buddhist? And I'm like, I don't know. And I Googled it. I was like, am I a Buddhist or something? And or how to become a Buddhist. And I found instructions from this website about how to take Buddhist vows. And I went out into the field at my school. It was 52 acres in Durango. It's really beautiful. And I sat on a blanket. I remember it super clearly. And with the mala, I took refuge. It's like the formal ceremony that later I took more formally in my tradition. But I took refuge 108 times on these beads. And I went back to the dorm, and I was like, all right, everybody, I'm Buddhist now. And everybody's like, oh, that's great, man. Congratulations. That's so cool, man. That's great. And so I had my own little ceremony.
What did that mean to you at the time?
I think it was kind of an identity thing. I think I wanted something I could identify with. I needed something that was like a ground. After all that instability, like after that being kind of blasted off into space, I needed help. I think that is actually like a very genuine way to take refuge when people decide to become Buddhist. It's like, I really need support on this path. Like, this is fucking hard.
Life.
Yeah. Especially when you start getting into it. You know, when you start asking questions and like trying to figure out like what we're here to do. And I think most of us can relate with that of like, yeah, I need help with this. So you take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha is like an example of somebody who's actually kind of just sat under a tree and figured this shit out really well. And he was able to explain it to other people. And many people have done that since him. And then you take refuge in the Dharma, which is like the teaching, the path, or the truth. That can be interpreted lots of ways, but you're not taking refuge in an automobile or like a good job or like a girlfriend, or you're taking refuge in these three things. It's like, it gives you something to work with. And then the third thing you take refuge in is the Sangha, the community of practitioners, which can also be interpreted a lot of ways.
And then was it kind of a straight path through Buddhism from there?
Not really. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's ever been straight as long as I've been on it. Maybe for a few years when I moved to Boulder, it felt straight. But it's been it's incredibly challenging.
How so?
Well, I guess I'll start with, like, I started reading Trungpa Rinpoche, a teacher who to this day I read almost every day, and I'm really involved with. He's dead, but he's incredibly controversial. He did a lot of things that on paper I just totally disagreed with. Even from the very beginning, I was just like, this guy is problematic. And on top of that, on top of like him actually not having credentials morally in my book when I was 16 or 17 years old, he was saying things I didn't want to hear.
Like?
That I disagreed with. Like the first thing that comes to mind is, this is very Trungpa Rinpoche, it's very specific, not, this is to him, not necessarily Buddhism. And he's like, you should wear a suit and a tie. Like, you should groom yourself. You should shave your beard and you should make yourself look nice.
Whoa.
And I remember, I actually have, I don't think I have it anymore, but I had the original book that I had a note in there. I think my note was like, yeah, fuck suits and ties. I thought he was being sarcastic. I was like, yeah, who needs suits and ties?
Squares. Wow.
You know, it was totally over my head. I did not understand what he was saying, but I could not stay away from him. Like, I could not stop thinking about him or reading him. I still can't. And a lot of that's like, I love language, and his use of language is really interesting and exciting to me. He's a very poetic teacher. He's not teaching by saying what he's saying. He's teaching by means of like poetry that speaks to something in you that you don't, like if you said it directly, it would kind of ruin it or something. So I really appreciate that. But that's one reason why it's been complicated, is that your teachers are constantly saying things you don't want to hear or that you don't feel like you agree with. But the whole picture seems to make so much sense that you kind of keep going with it. And I'm so grateful that I have, because you're working with the mind, and your mind is becoming more flexible the longer you practice and work with things. And so you're able to like hold what's being said in a bigger context, and it like things just kind of make more sense as you go along. But even still, for me, that's a huge challenge of, am I disagreeing with this because it challenges my ego? Or am I disagreeing with this because it's wrong?
How do you discern that?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. You look. Just look and see.
What do you think his intentions with those teachings and those behaviors were? Is it an intentional part of the teaching, or is he just living his life?
I think it is an intentional part of the teaching, and he's just living his life. I think it's both of those things. I actually used this analogy with a friend last night that I've been thinking about, because I don't know how much we want to get into the Shambhala stuff. I can go there a little bit,
yeah.
But it's a lot of scandal, a lot of controversy coming to light even still. And Trungpa Rinpoche, that was never a secret. Like, he was always provocative.
And he's the founder of that lineage.
He's the founder of Shambhala, which used to be called Vajradhatu. He really brought Tibetan Buddhism to the West. He escaped Tibet in 1959. He led a group of, I think, 300 people out of Tibet, and only 50 made it. And there's a book, it's the first book he wrote, called Born in Tibet, and tells the whole story. It's fucking crazy. And I guess he couldn't even share everything, because there were still people alive in refuge that could have been attacked by the Chinese for sharing it. So there's new stuff coming out. There's a new one called Lion's Claw or something that shares stuff that he couldn't share at the time. So to start with, extremely traumatic, crazy situation. He lost everything. He was in refuge in India, and then was invited to Oxford to study, where he developed his English and studied. And then he married a 16-year-old girl, British woman named Diana, and they together at some point, I don't remember the order of all the events, but he was in robes still. He was still a monk, but he crashed a car drunk into a joke shop and became partially paralyzed, and was, I think, kind of kicked out of the monastery he was at in Scotland. And with Diana, his 16-year-old wealthy British wife, flew to the US and started what is now my community.
Wow.
So what was I saying?
Just about some of what's coming to light now, and how it was never a surprise, I guess, with him.
Oh, and if that was who he was, or if that was a teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy that I was thinking of is that he was very formally trained from a very young age. By the time he was 12 years old, they said he was fully realized. I've heard that said. And if you read the kinds of stuff he was writing when he was 19, it's crazy. Crazy. I have one in my truck. I'll give it to you. It's the first thing he wrote in the West. It was 1969. That he kind of escaped Tibet with a fire that he had, and he was crossing over the Himalayas, and the fire was dwindling. He like lost a lot of it in a river. Literally, he like lost most of his texts in a river. And he went to India, got on a plane, like holding like just like what was it left? It was just like a little match worth of flame. This is like how I think of it right now. And he brought this match, and that's like all the Dharma he has in the world in this little match of a fire, you know. And he landed in the West and just started lighting things on fire, like just to keep the flame going and blowing on it and like getting the fire started again any way he could. And he was a drinker. He did love sex. He did do all these things. But I feel like his primary thing in his life was getting this fire going. And the fire spread, and he moved to Colorado, and it spread there, and he got everyone to move to Halifax at a certain point, which is bizarre. Like, why? And he lit the fire there, and the blaze just grew and grew and grew, and it like burned him up. And it burned up a lot of people around him.
In a destructive way?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that's one way to think of it. But also in a productive way. Like the fire was the point. He got it over here. And I don't think he cared at all about whether people would agree with what he did or not agree, or because that's not the point. He didn't care about that. What he cared about was preserving this huge wealth of teachings, like unfathomable amount of teachings that he gave and preserved that are recorded.
That wouldn't have made it out of Tibet otherwise, you think?
I don't think so. Not the way they did. Not in a way that could speak to... That's the other thing. He just understood Western minds. Like, he just understood us in a way that I haven't seen any other teacher. He's like 1 in 1,000 years teacher, I feel like.
So what's been happening in Shambhala in the last year then?
So his son is the lineage holder. And in the past year, a lot of reports have come out about his behavior, again, being problematic. And now it has kind of a different quality to it, because at least in my experience, the Sakyong is his title, but we call him the Sakyong, has always been kind of presented as being very clean cut and kind of different than his father. I always kind of liked that about him, because I knew that what I wanted was like a crazy teacher to come and wake me up and be all wild and have good stories to tell about. And I kind of trusted that he wasn't doing that with me.
The son.
Yeah. Again, that's one of those things. Is this my ego, or is this, I thought that I'm like, what my ego wants is for him to be a crazy teacher and to, So it turns out he's just much more private, the Sakyong. And, his upbringing, he was born in the Tibetan refugee camp in India, and he came over to the West. I forget what age he was, really young. But I think his childhood was pretty fucked up. I don't think there was a lot of support for him. And from what I hear, when he was young, he was like really struggled socially. And I'm not presenting this as an excuse for behavior at all, but giving a background to, I think that he just doesn't really know how to connect with people. I was telling you this earlier. Has an enormous amount of power that he didn't really ask for, and I don't think he knows really what to do with sometimes. And he's surrounded only by his students, at least in the West when he's here. And when that's combined with being horny, all those things combined, I think that people are just bound to get hurt, and people were hurt by him. Most of what I heard in the reports was people just feeling ignored and used. I think a couple of the reports, even that they wanted to be involved with him, but the way that it happened was just disrespectful and hurtful. And it's not okay. I think it's taken, and then those people felt silenced by other members of the community and gaslit, and just the normal stuff that we're dealing with everywhere right now. It's just the same thing. It's not special. It's the same. And the way that I think about it is that, like, the message that I get from this, like the teaching that I'm getting from this, is that there's no refuge. there's no refuge from doing this work of addressing harm and patriarchy. Because that's really what it comes down to, I think. And power. I think power just does something to people. It blinds people. I think power is neutral. Power itself is neutral. And there's a lot of talk about power in the Vajrayana, actually. Power is neutral. It's something that we should have. We should have power. We should learn to cultivate power in ourselves and be able to know what to do with it when we have it. And we should use it for benefiting others. Again, back to that. But when power is distributed really poorly, when power is lopsided, I think it's just natural that it blinds somebody.
Has that changed the teachings for you, that the container has been proven to be, I don't know, human?
Yes and no, because a lot of the teachings are about that the sacred and the mundane are seen to be the same. So things like how an organization is set up is regarded as sacred, or how we regard our money is regarded as sacred. That's a huge part of my path that's been very helpful to me, like how you do dishes, how you keep your bed, how you talk to the mailman. All these things are not regarded as separate from your path. That's the little stuff is the big stuff. It's like everything is seen as ritual. What was that quote? Everything is prayer that you shared on your... I've thought about that as everything that you do is a ritual, and rituals invoke something. So even how you start your car is a ritual, and it actually invokes a certain quality, and that contributes to how your day ends up and how people feel about you and how people feel, and the world around you is affected by how you do things. So in that sense, it's been a little confusing because that's what we've been talking about this whole time. And if we've been talking about this whole time and all this harm is being caused and then hidden, it's scary. It sucks. Another message I've gotten from this is that, like, I've walked away from everything that I've disagreed with my whole life. You know, I've always walked away from what I disagree with. And it's like the world found the one thing that I can't walk away from. You know, it just means too much to me. And that's what I mean by, like, there's no refuge from doing this work. It would feel insincere to just say, you know, fuck this, I'm out. And that's not to say that nobody should do that. I'm in a particular position of privilege in that I haven't been harmed in this way in our community. And I support people who need to walk away and who are. But I think I need to stay. With whatever ends up happening. I don't know what that's going to look like. It feels like it's dissolving pretty rapidly. So,
do you feel like this path has given you a way to, like, understand and hold the fact that reality isn't real? You know, what was revealed to you in that first trip? Like, how have you come to, like, be a person in the world and hold that truth?
I think I'm still working with it. I think it's a path always. I think as soon as you say that you've got it or something, then it's, you know, what's that then? I think I definitely have more tools to work with the groundlessness that happens when things prove themselves to be less solid than you thought they were, which is really what's happening in our community and my life personally right now. You know, instead of telling all my friends that they're characters in my dream and pissing on the floor, I definitely feel like you get tools so that when things prove themselves to be groundless, that you can still show up and you can still be of benefit. And that's not all bad news. That's closer to the truth. That's closer to what's real. The groundlessness.
Yeah. I guess then there really is nothing to fear if that just is what's happening.
Trungpa Rinpoche said chaos should be regarded as extremely good news.
It feels very relevant to the state of the world in general right now.
Yeah. It's hard to think of the words good news and the state of the world in the same moment, but
I've been thinking about that a lot in the context of discomfort and learning to sort of shift my desire away from trying to arrange my environment around me for my comfort and learn to just be okay in the discomfort, because then it stops being something that I need to have an opinion about. It just is. And like change, I think, is always traumatic, you know, from the inside, especially from the human perspective inside. And yeah, I think I'm always curious for practices, whether it's psychedelics or meditative practices that help endure the change that can feel like it's so far beyond a scale that my human vessel can synthesize, rationalize.
Yeah, it's so important, being okay with discomfort.
Where do you feel like you're growing in your practice right now? Are you focusing on anything in particular?
I think until recently I was really excited about exploring all the different branches of the path and all these different practices and the colorful aspects of the Vajrayana world. And I feel recently I am really returning to just the most essential core work of just working with the mind in a really simple way. Returning to the natural state of kind of openness and simplicity.
You think that's humans' natural state?
Openness and simplicity. That's what the masters would say. I don't know how much of an experience I have of that kind of mind, but yeah, in Shambhala it's called basic goodness. Basic goodness, that things are, that we're inherently awake and that we're also confused. So those two things at the same time.
Do you feel confused?
Oh yeah, definitely. You don't have to think about that one.
It's funny, I think of you as such a like grounded person.
I feel very confused.
Can I ask you about sobriety?
Sure.
I'm curious how many years have you been sober now? Do we have to go?
No, 5.
5.
We got like 20 minutes.
Where does that sit in this journey?
I've been thinking about this a lot. So a friend, I was telling her about my drinking, and she never knew about it, and my history with drinking. So for the record, I was like very severely alcoholic for like probably 4 years or 5 years. It was really bad. And when I say severe, I don't mean that I was just partying really hard and like being late to work, but I was having DTs and seizures and hallucinations and drinking 30 beers a day plus whiskey, and
Wow.
to the point where I lived on the streets for 10 months in Colorado and ended up in jail for 2 months, and it was very severe, intense. And my friend asked me, like, well, what happened? Like, how did that happen? Because I had kind of everything going for me, and I still don't know. I think I've always been kind of like prone to indulge in things that feel good.
That doesn't sound like it felt very good.
No, because this is a slippery slope, you know. That's a good point, is that I don't believe that any addict, I think that we have all these 8 different ways of talking about ableism, racism, and like mental health issues and discrimination based on gender identity and all these things. I think that a conversation that we need to start having is addiction stigma. I don't think there's a word for it yet, or like really eloquent people talking about it yet, or writing books about it yet, but I don't think that anybody chooses to be an addict. And when you say that, it's easy to nod to, because it's like, well, who would choose to be an addict? But I think we act like people do.
And that they therefore deserve their suffering
Right.
somehow. Yeah.
Well, that's just, that's what you get, or that person's being a fucking idiot. Or like, we hate the drunk. We hate the drunk person in the room. We don't think about what happened to get that person to that point. We don't think about the causes and conditions that led that person to end up in that state, even though we live in a society that glorifies booze. And it's the only drug in the world that you have to justify not taking. You ever thought about that?
That's so well said.
Like if you offered me heroin and I said no, you wouldn't look at me weird. If you offer me a cup of coffee, which is a drug, and I say no thanks, you're like, okay. But if you offer me a beer and I say no thanks, it's like, oh, are you like not drinking right now? Is that like a thing? Are you taking a break? That's weird. That's weird.
Is that a symptom of, I don't know, the capitalist machinery around alcohol?
I don't know. It's almost like collective addiction. And addiction is in like not seeing the cause and effect of a substance being used. It's like a collective ignorance around what alcohol does, which is crazy because the evidence is all right there. But that's what addiction does, is you can't see the cause and effect. My mentor, my meditation instructor in Boulder, saw my drinking way before I did. And she was like, you need to watch this. She's like, you need to pay attention to cause and effect. She said those exact words, like cause and effect, Chase. And I just didn't get it. I could not understand it. And I pushed her away. I think I am especially sensitive to like the ups and downs that substances give me, and food. Like I feel food hit my system in like seconds if I'm eating and I'm really hungry. Sugar, I go up and then back down really quickly. And I think that people who are like quote unquote alcoholics, a lot of them have that. Some people, they drink a beer and it takes like an hour for it to hit their system. They have this slow up and this slow down. And it's like an enjoyable ride that happens very slowly overnight. So they have 2 beers and they feel pretty good. But when I have a beer, it hits my system like immediately. And then I crash in 20, 30 minutes. And I need another beer to feel good again. I think it's like a lot of it's just how our bodies work is what dictates how much one person drinks and how much another person drinks.
So when you were at 30 beers a day, you were just constantly riding that?
Yeah. And it got to a point, it starts like you get a little shaky around 5 p.m. and you need a beer. And then you get a little shaky earlier in the day, you need a beer. And you just keep pushing it up and up and up until you're having a beer in the morning. And you wake up with the shakes until you can't sleep because you wake up shaking in the middle of the night. And you need 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 beers to stop shaking, to literally seizing, like waking up in seizure, literally. And rats and snakes crawling on the walls and screams coming from the next room, and none of it's actually happening.
Hell.
It's like fucking hell. Yeah. And like people who you think some on the streets who are like look like they're on serious drugs, some of them are just on booze, and they can take you there. And it took me there. Yeah.
How'd you get out?
I'm trying to think of what length story to tell. I was also a smoker, a cigarette smoker for 12 years. Similarly addicted, extremely hooked, like crazy if I didn't have cigarettes. I tried everything to quit. And I read this book that everyone's read called The Easy Way to Stop Smoking by Alan Carr. This isn't a plug because the book didn't work for me and he's an asshole. So it's not a plug for that book. You should read it if you smoke cigarettes and you want to stop. You should read it probably, but it didn't end up working for me. But the logic was so good. I knew that the logic worked. I knew what he was saying was true. This is cigarettes, but I was a drunk and a smoker. I knew if I could understand, if it could just click what he was saying, that I would stop smoking. I would never go back to it. But the book wasn't sinking in for me. Then I found this app by this guy named Jason Vale. I am going to plug this. If you smoke cigarettes and you're ready to quit, like, it's so stupid. This goofy ass British guy who talks to you for 2 hours. He had worked with Alan Carr. They had a falling out. So he started his own app.
Okay.
And it's the same logic. It's the same stuff. It's the same content. And he's got a British accent, and it's really easy to listen to. And he talks to you for 2 hours. And he, like, basically de-brainwashes you about the addiction. It's kind of repetitive. It's a little hypnotic. But it's what it's not doing. It's not telling you why you should quit. Everyone knows why they quit, he says. Like, it's about understanding why you think you like to smoke, why you think you smoke, and how misinformed that is. Like, actually, what you think you're getting from cigarettes cigarettes aren't doing for you at all. Like, anytime you've gotten any kind of enjoyment out of smoking, it was despite the cigarette, not because of it. That's what he says. It's really interesting. That the only reason that you want a cigarette is because you had one before. And it makes this little hole that you have to fill again that never works, you know? So I quit with this app, smoking, while I was a blackout drunk.
Whoa.
While I was at 20, 30 beers a day. I used this app, and I never smoked again, which is crazy. They say you can't do that if you're that heavy of a drinker, that you couldn't. But it worked, because it literally just changed my relationship to the addiction. And I knew when that happened that I could quit drinking the same way, except it was more complicated because you can die from withdrawal from alcohol, especially at that level. So I was trying to constantly figure that out, how to work that. I knew that I was there with alcohol too. Like, I was sick of it for a long time. I wanted to stop and I couldn't.
It's such a scary feeling.
Yeah, it's the only drug in the world that you can die from withdrawal. Other drugs will put you through hell, but they won't actually kill you from withdrawal.
Because you're so physiologically dependent on it.
Yeah, your nerves. I think. I don't know how all the science behind it, but I definitely know that I was very close to death a couple times. And I would steal booze, and it was because I thought I was going to die.
Whoa.
So I don't know how many of my old friends are going to listen to this, but if I ever stole booze from you, it's nothing personal. I'm sorry, but I thought I was going to die, literally. And you can. So I was really bad. Summer of 2014, fucking craziest summer in the world. Any bike messenger in Chicago will tell you, I was a bike messenger for years, that summer almost killed everybody. So many crazy things happened. It was all day drinking every day for a big group of messengers, and it was just fucking crazy.
Do you think that's alcoholic culture, bike messenger culture?
Yeah, there's definitely messengers who have their shit way together, and they're amazing people. And so are these people are amazing too. But that summer was the hardest I've ever drank. But I was happy. I was happier than I was in Colorado when all that other stuff was happening. I'd made it through all that. And I was happy being on this bike. This giant fish just jumped out of the water right by us.
Whew, Nat Geo right here.
So my friend, the long story short is that I told my friend that my best friend, Brandon Goebel, that I was going to quit drinking, that I needed to check myself into a hospital, and that I was going to do it the following week. And he texted me back. He's like, why next week? I was like, oh, I don't want to lose my job. I just want to say I'm going out of town or something, and I'm going to check myself into a hospital. And then I broke my phone. It was late at night. I think I was out until 3 or 4 that night, and I don't even know where I was. Actually, there's pictures from that night or the night before that of me with my 8-foot-long cargo bike in my messenger garb with some 20-year-old woman that I don't know, and this sugar daddy weird rich man with my bike in the back of his pickup truck. And he was hammered, and we were driving around Chicago with my bike in the back of his truck, drinking at bars, and he was buying us drinks.
Wow. Living the life.
I pieced that together from pictures on my work cell phone, my US Messenger cell phone. But the next morning, 6:30 in the morning, my bedroom door flew open, and Brandon was there, and he was like, we gotta go. And I was like, what? I thought it was an emergency, a fire or something. I had no idea what was happening. I was still wasted, obviously. Like, put on your shoes. And he got me out the door and went to the hospital with my mom. Was outside waiting. She was not happy. She did not understand anything.
Really?
I mean, I think she understood, but it was very awkward. It was not this good feeling moment. My mom was in from the suburbs to
take you to detox.
Yeah, I don't think they knew what was going on.
Wow. Do you feel like you were pretty quote unquote functional? Like, would most people know that you were drinking as much as you were?
Depends who you ask. The great thing about being a bike messenger is you're only in front of people for like 5 seconds at a time. Everything else is on the radio. And even if you reek of booze, I think you're just like the scumbag bike messenger and nobody thinks. It's like...
Wow, and that was it after that?
Yeah, so I went to the hospital for 3 days and detoxed. They give you like drugs and IVs. The dehydration is a huge thing. Like, I don't know if you've ever been like extremely dehydrated, but it feels like your cells are suffocating. It feels like you're baking alive or something. And then the DTs feel like shards of glass in your veins for days. That's why you just keep drinking. Like, it feels like there's glass dust in your veins and like electricity in your spine, and you can't sit still and you can't relax at all. So I never drank again after that. I never did a program. I never did any kind of AA, or it's just not my path. That's a whole other story, but I describe it like I completely exhausted my relationship with alcohol. I took it as far as it could have possibly gone. It should have probably killed me. I was hospitalized 3 times in my last year of drinking.
Wow.
I just see all the way through it. It doesn't bother me when people drink at all. I don't have any kind of like, because I know all, like I said, every part of alcohol, like I'm familiar with the parts that feel really good and the parts why being social. There was a time like when I was really young that I could have a social beer and it was fun. It was nice. Very brief time. Like, I get it, but I have zero curiosity about what a drink would be like. I know exactly what a drink would be like. It probably just ruined my day.
Do you feel like the part of you that led you to seek whatever you were looking for in alcohol has changed or been healed?
I think partially. I think it's still difficult for me to relax. I think I still have a personality with vices. Like, I still have an unhealthy relationship with things that help me, like, whether sometimes it's like a friendship or a relationship or crutches, sparkling water. We're drinking sparkling water out of a cooler I have in my truck. Like little crutches, tea tree toothpicks. I am a fidgety person, and I think I drank because I was fidgety. I drank because it was hard to relax.
I can relate to that feeling of needing to be doing something. I would think that meditation would be huge for that.
Yeah, I think it is. I think when I'm practicing a lot, those subside a lot after a retreat. When I'm like really disciplined, I think those things do subside a lot. But I got a lot of karma. I got a lot going through me, you know? Like, so I have to do a lot of practice.
How do you look back on that time or that chase? Does it feel like a different person, or do you feel connected to?
I actually kind of love him. Like, I know why. I'm surrounded by some of the most incredible people, like people I'm still friends with. When I was a messenger, particularly. In Colorado, I felt kind of abandoned. But when I was a messenger, really amazing people were around me. And I think because I was such a fucking goofy asshole, I had a lot of fun. Like, I did a lot of crazy fun things, and it's okay. Like, I don't have any hard feelings towards that chase. Earlier than that, in Colorado, it was bad. I struggle with that period of my life. It was really bad. I was just so blindsided by cause and effect. Like, I was just so, yeah.
I know we have to go. I was just going to ask you one more thing, which is to kind of tie that to what you were talking about earlier with Trungpa Rinpoche. Do you have a sense, especially in this time where I think culturally we're like forcing ourselves to look at harm, do you have a sense of sort of how to hold people that we love and respect, and the fact that they're also capable of doing harm. And because I feel like the fact that you found that love for yourself speaks a lot about where you are in that journey.
I think I think it's easier for me to work with the transgressions of my teacher or his behavior because of what I've experienced. Like, I feel like I am able to still connect with their wisdom because I know kind of what it's like to be in that kind of, I don't know what it's like to be drunk Rinpoche the way he drank. But what was the question?
Sort of about, like, I guess just how to hold people that we love and admire and respect and, like, take a lot of good things from, and also understand that those same people can be capable of harm and destruction,
Yeah,
and, like,
that's the
what
big
accountability
question right
looks like in that case.
That's the big question right now. I think everybody's really working with that question. I almost think like the question, the question's more important than the answer. You know, I don't know where I just heard that. Somebody just said that to me. I think we've all heard variations of that, but it's true. It's not so much having an answer to how to do that right now, but that we're all asking that question now does something. It has an effect. It opens our minds to the situation more closely to as it is, you know, rather than it being our narrative of it.
So, like, the willingness to see what's real, even like you were saying earlier, if it's not what we want to hear.
Right. And as filmmakers, like, we know that as soon as you start telling a story from a perspective, it's biased in a direction, right? As soon as you have a narrator telling the audience what to look at when, I think it's similar. Like, there's this situation as this open display. And then there's how we're looking at it given all of our conditioning as people in our lives. And there's not one that's right and one that's wrong. It's about holding both those at the same time. Like, knowing that my response to this situation is conditioned by my experiences in my life, but also knowing that the picture is much bigger than that. And then just using my intelligence and how I move through that and how I work through that. I think we want an answer. We want an answer that we can hold on to. That's the reference point that we want.
Right.
And I don't think it works that way.
Well, I appreciate you sharing, because I know you're in process with all of this, but it gives me a lot of, like, comfort to hear you sharing what you're learning as you're learning it. So thank you.
Thank you for listening.
I'm so glad y'all decided to spend another hour of your time and consciousness with us today. It means so much that we get to share these spaces together. So thank you for being here. I wanted to share one thing that Chase reminded me of with that crazy story about when he was 16 years old, and that is about trip sitting. I know you psychonauts out there already are familiar with the idea of set and setting, which is that when you are going through a psychedelic journey, you want to be ideally really intentional about the place and the people and the energy and intention with which you are doing it. And that is not to say that using psychedelics in a really social context or out at a concert or as a way of simply experiencing different aesthetic experiences is invalid. There's no rules about how to do this. But I do think that people tend to be able to go deeper into the medicine in situations where they feel safe and there's a context that helps ground them. So Chase mentioned that his friend was kind of assigned as his trip sitter, but as 16-year-olds, they didn't really have much of a basis for what that meant exactly. And I wanted to share Double Blind Magazine, which is a new psychedelic magazine run by two badass psychedelic women out of LA that just started this year. They put out some really concrete guidelines for how to trip sit recently, and I just wanted to share them because I mean, they certainly help in psychedelic contexts, but it applies much more broadly to how to hold space for people who are navigating any kind of darkness. And I think it ties in with what it means to be a deep listener and to be available for people. And while psychedelics are becoming more and more available, there's sort of this one track of medicalization. And I've heard a lot of people say recently how excited they are about the idea of psychedelic, specifically psilocybin and ketamine clinics popping up all around the country as legalization changes. And I do think that's a beautiful vision, but I also think it has the potential to be problematic because it still can deny access to communities and people who have traditionally been marginalized from healthcare, period, in this country. And I still think that the mushroom herself is the guide, is the medicine, is the nurse, and that I think we can trust each other and trust ourselves to understand that for thousands of years before medicalization in the Western sense, these practices were shared in ceremony, in community, by lay people, and yes, with the guidance of a medicine man or a shaman many times. But the plants themselves teach us how to become the shaman, how to become the guides for ourselves and one another. And I think it's actually a pretty big disservice to the medicine and healing and transformation that's possible if we start to think that psilocybin clinics or super structured, institutionalized paths to access to this medicine is the only or even the best way to do this. So if you are curious and feeling ready for psychedelic experiences yourself, or if you're a psychonaut and have friends who are coming to you because they're interested and think of you as someone that can help hold space for them, I just wanted to share these 8 tips on maybe how to go about doing that, because we absolutely are capable. So I would find a time to do it where you don't have any interruptions for at least 12 hours, but ideally 24. You don't want to be dealing with phone calls from work or people walking in potentially. Find a safe space. If that's in your house, awesome. If you have the means to go out someplace where you can be in nature, even better. Turn off all of the technology and put on comfy clothes. I always end up ripping my sports bra off at some way about halfway through a trip. And maybe have a playlist of some music handy so that if you are ready to have some sweet voices, some guidance across time and space come in, you don't have to fall into some kind of K-hole dealing with a screen and trying to navigate Spotify. And then, using Chase as our example, know your dosage. A lot of my mentors have said that dosage can be a game, and I think in a sense that's absolutely true. If you're debating between going and drinking another cup of ayahuasca, or you're debating between 2 or 2.5 grams of mushrooms, it's really, the medicine will do what it needs to do. You'll have the kind of trip that you're going to have. That extra 0.5 gram is not going to be the difference between a quote-unquote good trip and a bad trip. And as I've said many times before, I don't believe that there is such a thing as a bad trip. There are some really challenging trips, and there can be challenging years for people that don't have good set and setting or context or very good support integrating what happened in the trip afterwards. But ultimately, what we're doing is confronting what is inside of us. These aren't demons that come from the outside. This is accessing what's already happening within us. And it's all for our growth and development. And what we think of, I think, as a good trip are situations where we're able to confront a lot of what's inside us that we normally ignore, push away, numb out, and confront it with grace and surrender and willingness to look and see. And that can be really hard if you're in a really chaotic environment, or if you're around people that you feel like you don't want to know that you're tripping, etc., etc., etc. So do your research, figure out what kind of trip you want, and obviously get your medicine from a reputable source so that you don't have any kind of mind games about that, and you can just take it with full confidence. So, number 1 is be ready and willing to sit quietly for a long time. You can think of that as a meditation if you'd like, but really as trip sitters, a huge part of it is just being sort of an anchoring presence, not needing to do, not needing to fix or adjust, but just being present. Number 2 is be non-directive and supportive. You're a sitter, not a guide. Once again, I think that means that the mushrooms or the plants themselves are the guide, and that the relationship is really between the journeyer and the plants, or the journeyer and God, or the journeyer and themselves. You are supportive, but you are not generating the experience as the trip sitter. Number 3, encourage them to trust the experience, to surrender to whatever is coming up. So be affirming, and if someone says, I'm dying, you actually don't have to say, no, you're not, you're okay, you're in this room. You can actually affirm, yes, it's okay to die. You're safe to look in there. I've got you. I'm looking over your body. You'll come back. Remind them that there's nothing that can go wrong. There's no wrong way to do the experience. There are no wrong feelings to have. It's all okay, and this is a safe time to look at and feel all of it. Number 3, don't leave them alone. Ask them not to lock the door to the bathroom when they use it. I think that's self-explanatory. Number 4, prepare food and water ahead of time. This is a funny one because I usually have absolutely no appetite for about 6 hours and then suddenly become extremely ravenous. And then I take about 3 bites of food and I'm like, well, I'm done. So I'm a big fan of smoothies and having those on hand. I'm a vegan in general, so obviously I'm not going to recommend that you have some hot dogs ready. But I will say that I think psychedelics make you very aware of the energetic exchange that's happening at all time between all things. And particularly in those states, I'm very aware of how the food that I'm putting into my body carries a signal and is interacting with me. And the idea of putting suffering into my body, especially in that state, I learn a lot about some of the habitual patterns of consumption, particularly. I remember one time I was with a friend and we were coming down from a mushroom trip. We were out in a cabin in the woods and we had some cut fruit to eat. And I was taking a couple bites of strawberries, which first of all just taste like nature's crack. You're just like, I cannot believe that the universe provided this for my mouth. But also I remember having the revelation like, oh, this food is dying. This food has been removed from its life source and it's already on its way to decaying. And that was such a strange thing to realize, that I was putting food into my body that was nourishing me, but it was already in the process of relinquishing its process. Number 5, ask the person about once an hour if they'd like to describe what's going on. Check in with spaciousness in case the person does want to express something. Number 6, discourage excessive communication or analysis. I think that's pretty clear. You want to stay out of a head space and stay in a heart space, in a somatic space. The practitioner I worked with for the first time in the jungle actually cautioned about being careful even days and weeks down the road after psychedelic trips of boiling it down into a few words or sentences or even paragraphs, and a reminder that our experiences inside of these spaces are infinite, and just to try to honor that by not packaging up like, this is what this trip was about, or this is what I learned, or here's where I went. And that's really helped me kind of leave the door open to a lot of magic, even as I've integrated experiences back into this realm through language. Number 7, don't dismiss anything they say. Number 8, check in with them a day or two later. So I just really appreciated how clear-cut and direct those were, and I saved them on my phone as kind of a reminder just to check in with myself, because sometimes it can feel like a lot of responsibility when a friend asks me to hold space for them in a psychedelic experience. And if I start to feel anxious, I just have to check in with myself and be like, what kind of expectations am I building? That's actually my own ego becoming a lot more self-important than the situation calls for. So something that I've taken away from my trip sitting experiences and I have been integrating into my life and all my relationships is just carrying the torch, carrying the signal of you are okay. In this moment, you are okay. In the darkness, you are okay. In the struggle, you are okay. Even in fear, you are okay, and what you are experiencing is okay. And to just give people space to be exactly who they are often actually becomes the conduit through which they can release whatever difficulty they may be in that moment. Because as Buddhist traditions teach, it's not actually the pain itself that creates the horror. It's our resistance to it. It's all of our stories about it. It's all of the shame and guilt and resentment that we create around the experiences. And I know that the teachers and mentors and friends who create space for me, as one of my friends, Sweet Sarah Knapp, says, who holds the bucket for me while I'm purging and doesn't have, her own reactivity or opinions about it, but just lets it come out of me. Like, that is such a sacred relationship, a sacred exchange. And I think as our culture learns again, remembers how to do that for one another, our healing will just accelerate, and we'll be able to purge so much of the trauma and junk that just starts to fill up our natural processes by letting go and being cleansed by the non-judgmental love of other creatures who are just like us. It's really powerful magic. So thank you for being here, and we will hang again next week. If you want to connect in the meantime, you can always find me on the interweb, maurajames.com, and Maura James on Instagram. I love you.
Blue and gold, color of the skies below. Only in the light, only in the light of this world. Swarm of bees, they form a pillow under me. Buzzing in the light, buzzing in the light of this world. I'm not alone in the mystery, not alone in the mystery. I'm not alone, I feel at home in the seems to me I'm watching someone else's dream. Only in the light, buzzing in the light of this world. Solid gold, feeling of the sun below. Only in the light, I'm buzzing in the light.